Many thanks for staying with us on Report Desk Africa. Now, this Wednesday, which was yesterday, millions of Congolese citizens started voting in one of the most anticipated elections of 2023. The high-stakes vote could represent the second peaceful civilian-to-civilian transition in the Democratic Republic of Congo's history since independence from Belgium in June 1960. Although, ironically, this country has also been marred by lots of violence, which also led people to be scared and skeptical about the security situation when the votes were about to start. Now, there have been mounting concerns about transparency, especially after the European Union Observer Mission pulled out and hundreds of thousands of people in areas in the volatile East are unable to vote because of the spiraling issues that are recorded in the country. There were also, like I mentioned earlier, insecurity from armed groups, and we did also learn that electoral materials came in late, one of the biggest fears that the country also had before the election day. And all of these are what amounted to the election spilling over into today. But we're going to find out what the update is very shortly. We'll be joining our guest soon. But Bennett, what's your thought on the elections?
So quite interestingly, the Democratic Republic of Congo's election is one that I think a lot of eyes would have been on, bearing in mind that the DRC is the last country in Africa to hold their presidential elections in the year of 2023.
Yeah.
We've had 7 elections leading up until now. The last one was Egypt, and the Egyptian president won that with the proverbial landslide. But then there were expectations that Felix Tshisekedi of DR Congo may not be able to gather that much vote to win this election if he does win. But of course, there are thoughts that the power of incumbency will come in.
Yeah, of course.
So sadly, like you did mention in the introduction, the elections has brought forth a lot of issues. We talked about insecurity issues, places where some people were not able to vote as at when due. Electoral materials did not get to certain polling units on time, and it has spilled into its second day. So one would have thought that with 7 different elections taking place on the continent throughout the year, the Electoral Commission of the Democratic Republic of Congo would have had enough time to watch, observe, and prepare fully for theirs, which was the last in the year. Unfortunately, that seems to not have been the case because it, like you did mention, it's been bedeviled by several issues, unfortunately.
I think the DR Congo election was always going to be very predictable because I remember I was having a conversation with one of my guests, and he did say that the major fears that they have are that of insecurity, especially in those volatile areas, especially those areas that are always monitored by the M23 rebel groups. And then they also talked about the fear of election materials not getting in on time, because some regions are hard to reach, and the materials, I don't know, just some different reasons. And he did mention that outrightly. So it's not exactly surprising to see that these things are playing out. It means that there was no adequate preparation, like you just mentioned. Sure. And then in terms of the candidacy, we understand that Tshisekedi is going against about 24 opposition parties. But right now, when you ask, there are 2 names that are mentioned, but even those 2 names, people claim that they're not as popular, and they're not as strong. But they also say that all these candidates have come out with different manifestos, but it doesn't sound like what the people want to hear. The people are not convinced because, of course, there's always something about dissatisfaction when it comes to the African continent. When a president comes into power and people are expecting him to do differently, but he does something, totally out of the expectations. And so when the election period comes, you always hear things like the people were dissatisfied with the current administration. And that's the same thing that played out in the DR Congo, because right now people are not so satisfied with what Felix Tshisekedi has done. But whether or not he will still be able to clinch the seat, like you said, the power of incumbency is a very strong one, on the African continent, once you've gotten to that place. And I think that's what gives people so much confidence, especially those who are in the present administration, like no matter what, there's still that power of incumbency that, a lot of people will say the devil they know is better than the angel they do. So there's still that confidence that a large number of them will vote for him. I don't know if that has to change because, again, it's risky to try something that you're not very sure of. Everybody will say that their own administration will work better until they get to that position. So should they stick with the person that they know and just manage him for another term, or try someone else? And I don't think that any candidate has given them that glimpse of hope out of the 18 candidates. I don't know about that.
I'm not sure. And then to put in perspective what you're saying, as I mentioned, there were 7 elections before this one. Of those 7, I think it was just the Nigerian election that brought in a new president, so there was no power of incumbency. But all other of those 7, 6 brought in the incumbent presidents, except for Liberia.
Well, Nigeria indirectly, the power of incumbency.
No, it was not the power. The power of incumbency of the party.
Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly.
Party,
I mean, that counts.
Well, yeah.
It does count.
Anyway, it does count. All right, we'll see if we have our guest joining us now. Our guest is State House, he's former youth advisor, State House, Democratic Republic of Congo. We're talking about Eddie Musoke. Eddie, can you hear us? Eddie, can you hear us? Okay, you may need to unmute your device, please.
Yes, good evening. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Good evening, Eddie.
Good evening. Good to see you all.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Eddie. First of all, well, we're seeing now that the elections are still ongoing, spilling into the second day. Now, do you think, according to Dennis Kadima, who's the president of the Independent National Electoral Commission, now he did say that, that he and his team came on a bit late, which is one of the challenges that they've had, that they first came on because they were appointed very late during this electoral period, and it's part of the reason why they're having challenges. Do you think that this, as a challenge, would affect the results that we may see eventually at the end of this election?
Thanks for having me. I think it's not a matter of when they were appointed or when they were supposed to start, because there is a law that actually embodies the electoral commission, and Dennis Kadima was put in place. The money was put in place by the government. Over 1.2 billion US dollars have been spent over these elections, very chaotic elections. I've heard you talk about the candidates and everything, but already it's you've talked about the power of incumbency, and I think that is the huge issue that we have right now in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The current president, already. They are saying that he prepared the chaos with the current electoral body so that they can declare him the winner and so on and so forth. But I don't think there are so many reasons around this chaotic election in the DRC. But late appointment is none of them because they were appointed, they were in office, and if for any reason they thought they were appointed late, they could have rearrange the electoral calendar, because the electoral calendar that was passed by the parliament and later on signed by the president is the electoral calendar that was given by the same Dennis Kadima. So I don't think he can come today and say, no, we are changing this because we are having this issue because of the late appointment. Because the calendar that was given to the Congolese people was the same calendar that Dennis Kadima and his team worked on. And it is very unconstitutional based on the Congolese constitution, Article 52, Article 64, that they have surpassed the deadline of the election. The election was supposed to end yesterday, 20th of December. Now we are one day late, and we are yet to probably finish because there are still many incidents that are being claimed or registered in the eastern part of DRC, North Kivu, South Kivu, Ituri, and even in the capital city, Kinshasa, the stronghold of the main opposition leader, Moise Katumbi, in the Great Katanga. So there are a lot of issues that really surround these elections, and I think we are yet to see the worst.
Okay, Eddie, please hold your thoughts on that. We still have some more questions that we would like you to dissect for us, but we need to take this very quick break, and when we come back, we will still be looking at the elections, the presidential elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The show remains Report Desk Africa. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. The show is still Report Desk Africa. We're talking before the break about the elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I did mention that will be the last election or presidential election on the continent of Africa in the year 2023. We've had 7 before that, and this is the 8th. And the guest we had shortly before we went on that break was telling us about how it is not an excuse, as Eddie Musoke was saying, it is not an excuse. The reason that the Electoral Commission was giving, that the team came on a bit late during this whole electoral system or process, and that's why they're having certain issues. Blessings, he was saying it's not an excuse. And you remember I mentioned earlier that we've had 7 elections already, So there was enough time. We want to believe that there was enough time. And then from January to December, and then if things were not in place, there's always the option of postponing or moving the elections. So like you said, this probably was not an excuse.
I think one problem that Africa has as a whole is the thought that each African country has different dynamic problems, right? So they believe that their economic dynamics differ, their political dynamics differ, because like you said, this is a lesson that should have been learned from every other country that has held elections, right? I wouldn't say how hard it is to get materials ready because I'm not part of the committee, but I do believe that some level of planning would have prevented the situation altogether. And I also do understand that according to the Constitution, the elections are not even allowed to spill over. But here we are the second day, and I think the elections are still going on. We will need Eddie to confirm whether or not it's going to spill over into the next day. So sometimes I feel like the planning does not make room for contingency. Like the planning are just on the surface level. They do not put into considerations a lot of factors. And when the election time comes, we start seeing excuses that are similar to what every other country has faced. So I feel like until Africa as a whole begins to realize that we have very similar, albeit unique problems, then we will not progress because everybody feels like their problem is different from everybody's problem. So you don't tell them how to handle it. I mean, there's some African countries that don't even like international interventions.
True. Some have kicked out international intervention, very true. But let me see if I can play devil's advocate for the
You always want to play devil's advocate.
Now, like Eddie did say, and you mentioned before he even came on board, Congo, as we know, has had insecurity issues for the greater part of the year, particularly in the eastern part, North and South Kivu, Goma. Those regions have become household names when it comes to insecurity lately with the M23 rebels and all of that. So that may also, couldn't that also hinder certain preparation or preparatory measures towards these elections, as a matter of fact? Or do you think, already knowing that those areas are troubled, they would have made some contingency plans concerning those areas?
Honestly speaking, I don't think that it's a factor because, when I was checking about the story, I did see that they had beefed up security and they even asked for more helicopters, right? They were ready, to make everything secure and, safe for people to vote. So if we're talking about security as a factor, I don't think it applies to preparation. Maybe it applies to people and their fears of coming out to vote, because that was supposed to be my next question to Eddie as regards whether or not there was voter apathy and what could have caused it. Is it because they were tired of, having to vote in the same person and then there was no other person that was challenging enough? Or is it because they were scared, especially those volatile areas, they weren't sure what the security was, whether or not it was secure enough? But from our findings, we did see that they had beefed up security, right? They were ready in terms of security. So I don't think that's a factor because these regions as a country, the regions that are marred by violence, the regions controlled by certain terrorist groups, how to navigate these things, because we also did have the conversation on one of the shows and the person did say that some of those volatile areas, they had decided to move the elections to some other places that are safer. So these plans were in place. So reasons why it was, it delayed this much, I don't think it has anything to do with security, to be honest. Because we didn't even hear about any violence erupting that much that would say, okay, it torpedoed the elections at the time. So no, I don't think it's security.
All right, I think we have Eddie back on the line. Eddie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, thank you so much for staying with us, Eddie. So we're quickly talking about blessings. Just before you went on, went on that break, and before you came back, was talking about voter apathy. What can you tell us about the turnout in this election? Do you think the turnout was affected by any factors like insecurity? Like the people being tired of having the same of the same. What do we know about the turnout for this election?
According to the electoral body, they've said that 75% of the people of the registered voters have turned out. But again, we are not sure of that because obviously it's a political game. Everyone wants to look good. But we have people on the ground. We know what's going on. And we know that, of course, I will disagree with your colleague when she said that, and insecurity was not part of the factors. Yes, insecurity was part of the major factor, especially of the low turnout, especially in the Eastern DRC, more specifically North Kivu and Ituri. Already in places like Beni, where electoral kits were left alone by the agents because they were there were gunfires and everything and stuff like that. So there is in Goma right now is the center of is surrounded by all the IDPs, the internal displaced people who have come from Nyiragongo and Masisi and Ruchuru. Ruchuru and Masisi being among the regions that were excluded from these elections because of the insecurity issue. Going back to Kinshasa and to other places, there was also an issue of the turnout. People were there. People were willing to go and vote. But unfortunately, the issues of opening the polling stations very late, that is one of the factors. The chaotic organization of the elections, and especially on the D-Day, was a problem. It's in places like Kinshasa, some polling stations, Lubumbashi and even Loja, some polling stations were reported not open until late 7 p.m. Can you imagine? And voters, the voting hour was supposed to be from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., which was actually extended to up to around later in the night. So people are willing to vote, because these elections, remember when President Tshisekedi came into power in 2018, it was the first peaceful transition of power ever in the history of the DRC. So these elections have the attention of the entire world, because it is one of its kind. It's one of the first elections that we want to see how President Tshisekedi, coming from a very popular and a very strong opposition party for over 32 years, they've been fighting all governments from Mobutu to Laurent Kabila to Joseph Kabila, and now they are in power, and they've been doing the same things, even worse than some of these former governments have been doing. And now people who are, they were eager to see how they're gonna work on this. One of the other factors, probably before I take it back to you, I give it back to you, is that, remember in 2018 or 2011, those elections, the opposition, where President Tshisekedi now they were belonging at that particular time, they were swearing only on the presence of international observers, the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church observers, and now the same people who are now in power, only 5 years versus Kabila was 18 and Mobutu was 32 years in power. They are saying the international community and observers have no say in DRC elections. That is a very huge turnout in terms of what they stood for, especially in terms of democracy and freedom. And one of the other things is violence, division, and tribalism was one of the foundation of these campaigns. And we saw some of the stronghold of the current president, like in the central Kasai. No other candidate was able to go and do their campaigns because they were fearing to be I don't want to use the word slaughtered, but they were fearing violence, and because they were preaching violence. A campaign of an incumbent president should be based on what they have done for the past 5 years or the past mandate. But unfortunately, the current president only was campaigning against. He was like he's the opposition leader, and Katumbi and Fayulu are the ones in power, and so on and so forth. So insecurity, violence have already been reported in so many places. We've already have people have lost their lives between yesterday and today. So we will cross-check the facts, but we already know that in places like Kinshasa already, we've lost a couple of people, and in Beni in the eastern DRC.
It's so sad, Eddie, that lives have been lost. And thank you for that information. But I just wanted to quickly clarify that I'm not trying to downplay the issue of insecurity in the region. I'm just trying to say that in terms of preparedness, we do know that DRC has been marred by violence and insecurity. But in terms of preparedness, from the angle of the electoral committee, I don't think insecurity was the major issue. And you did mention that it had more to do with the electoral materials not getting in on time, the polling booths not opening on time. So that was what I was trying to say. I just wanted to quickly clarify that. But quickly and finally, Eddie, today is the second day of voting, and we do know that the Constitution does not even allow for it spilling over. But we haven't even heard anything about the voting being rounded off. So is it that it's still going to spill over to tomorrow, or is it concluding today? Do we have any concrete, information?
Already we know. First of all, thank you for clarifying, and I think I did understand. Probably I just lost for a few seconds, and I thought you talked about insecurity not being a major
issue.
No,
that's fine. That's fine. I'm glad we're on the same page
okay.
now.
It's okay. Of course, if you've learned already, for me and for everyone else who are interested in DRC, myself being from the DRC, it's a breaking news that the political coalition of former President Joseph Kabila has finally spoken. After over 1 year of silence, the former president, everyone was kneeling down, wanted the former president to support them. Even the current president, when he was in former President Kabila's backyard, he insisted to the people and say, you should talk to Mr. Kabila, we should work together and everything. Nobody forgets the fact that a few years back, they were in a coalition that was neglected by the current regime. However, the current election going from 28th to 21st is already unconstitutional according to the DRC constitution and the electoral law. Number one. Number two, we want to see what will be the reaction of the people, because the former President Joseph Kabila and his political party have called for Article 64. Article 64 is where the people have to be sovereign. The people have to take their fate in their own hands, and that is very dangerous as a statement with the current situation. Already, the tension is very, very high. So we don't know what's going to happen next, but we just going to observe, and we hope that there's no violence. And number three, sorry. I hope personally, I hope that the president, as the incumbent and as the person who is the chief magistrate of all institutions in the DRC, should do a press conference and clarify the opinion on what has happened, why is the election extended. Right now, we are waiting. We are following closely with the electoral body if there will be another extension, which I can assure you will create chaos.
Okay.
Already, Moise Katumbi, Matata Ponyo, former prime minister, and other candidates have already made some declaration. Martin Fayulu, on the other hand, and Denis Mukwege, the Nobel Prize, have asked for this election to be nullified so that they can call for fresh elections. So there's quite some twist into this, and we hope for the best, but we should keep an open eye on this, because DRC being one of the major political and economic player in Central and East Africa.
Okay, Eddie, I'm sorry. We need to wrap it up here. We have really run out of time. But definitely, the election in the DRC is one that I think everybody in Africa and even beyond Africa had their eyes on. Not just because it was the last on the continent, but because, like you said, it's quite strategic in Central and Eastern Africa. Thank you so much for your input, Eddie. We do hope that if there are more turn of events, we'll be able to reach out to you again, and we'll get more information concerning the election in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you so much for joining us, Eddie.
Thank you, Eddie.
For Africa, I'll be available. Thank you
so much.